Well, this December 10th is International Human Rights Day, the day marked every year by the United Nations, meant to raise awareness about basic human rights and violations to those rights that occur around the world. Solange Mougin has more now on what exactly a human right is, how the day came about, and where in the world those rights are violated most.
On display at the United Nations office in Geneva, but reproduced around the world. It is a precious document, for it puts forth on paper the rights and freedoms of all human beings. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights came about on the heels of the horrors of World War II at the Palais de Chaillot in Paris. Spearheaded by Eleanor Roosevelt, it was adopted by the UN General Assembly on December 10, 1948. Today, this milestone of a document is the most translated one in the world, with some 530 translations. Currently, all 193 member states of the UN have signed at least one of the 9 treaties that it inspired. While it is not legally binding, it laid the groundwork for international human rights law, with its list of 30 basic human rights, like the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, the freedom of expression, and the right to work and receive an education. Celebrated annually, the theme of this year's Human Rights Day is Our Rights, Our Future, Right Now. And the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says such ideals are grounded in very concrete daily actions.
Human rights are not abstract ideas or ideologies. They are about who we are and how we live. They are grounded in facts, in law, and in compassion. They embody our needs and our hopes.
But how is the world doing when it comes to human rights? The HRMI Rights Tracker breaks down these inalienable and universal tenets into categories, like quality of life, safety, and empowerment, tracking how nations treat their people. International organizations, watchdogs, and courts also do this painstaking work. With abuses occurring daily and around the world, the declaration is still at 76, just a first step. It's an end to impunity for abuses that remains the real and ever-constant challenge.
That report from Solange Mougin, who joins me now in the studio. Solange, in that report, you lay out the history of the Declaration of Human Rights as a whole, but talk us through some specifics or concrete examples of abuses of human rights today.
Well, human rights abuse is such a vast subject with so many different kinds of violations happening around the world that I thought I'd just stick to one country and one specific population. So if we take, for example, Afghanistan and the plight of women in Afghanistan, their trials illustrate how quickly and easily entire populations can lose basic rights, and actually how interconnected some of these rights are. Take one example, the latest measure by the Taliban. Earlier this month, they clamped down, according to multiple schools, on the right for women to learn to be midwives and nurses. Now, already Afghanistan is the only country in the world where women and girls are banned from general, secondary, and higher education. So these nursing and midwife schools were one of the last beacons of hope for women who otherwise largely are not allowed to work, to be in public without a male chaperone, to beg on the street, to even raise their voices in public, according to many reports and decrees. Now, Afghanistan, under the Taliban, is also a country in many places where women are not allowed to seek medical help from male doctors. So these nursing schools for women were essential not only for the meager sense of liberty and agency that they gave the students, but also for the good that these future midwives could provide for other women that needed or would need eventually their help.
The closure of these schools will go down as a bad memory for us. We've already lost all our great hopes, but this one was a small one that remained. If it finally disappears, we'll have nothing but bad memories, and our situation will be even worse.
The closure of these schools will go down as a bad memory for us. We've already lost all our great hopes, but this one was a small one that remained. If it finally disappears, we'll have nothing but bad memories, and our situation will be even worse. I was in my 8th semester of medical studies at a university when we were banned, so we were hoping to get a midwifery degree and serve our country that way. Now that the school has closed, all our hopes are gone.
Now, what I find particularly interesting here is how interconnected basic human rights are. By taking away the right to education, the right to employment, you're also harming the right to health care and thus to life potentially. According to the United Nations, in the next 2 years, the impact of barring 1.1 million girls from school and 100,000 women from university will directly increase the case of maternal mortality by at least 50% in Afghanistan. And that not only has a huge impact on lives, but it also has a devastating impact on the economy. By 2066, this apartheid on women, as some people are calling it, which is essentially erasing women from life outside the home, well, if it continues, nearly $10 billion, or 2/3 of Afghanistan's GDP, will be stripped from its economy. And all of that doesn't even touch the devastating effects that come from living in a place where there is essentially total impunity on how men treat their wives, their daughters, total strangers, just because they are women. It is bleak stuff, but it needs to be tracked and it needs to be talked about.
All right, Solange, thank you for telling us about that situation in Afghanistan on this International Human Rights Day. We're going to take a closer look now at the situation in India with correspondent Priyata Brajabasi. Priyata, thanks for speaking to us. India made global headlines this year over brutal crimes against women. What more can you tell us about where India stands when it comes to women's rights at the moment?
You know, it's an interesting time to have a conversation about women's rights, equality for women, but more specifically, women's safety in the country, because many people in the country believe that this year, 2024, was the year where all of these issues connected to women came to the forefront after more than a decade. And this, of course, took place after the incident of rape that took place in the East Indian city of Kolkata, where a young medical professional was brutally raped and killed in a hospital that she worked at. This particular incident, it created nationwide outrage. There were widespread protests all across the country, but it gave rise to a public discourse and a public debate about women's safety in the country, which is intrinsically linked to efforts of women's empowerment and women's upliftment in the country. And in fact, the sentiment that we are seeing in the country right now is very reflective of what happened exactly 12 years ago, this time in December, where a young woman was brutally gang raped in a moving bus in the national capital of New Delhi. She was thrown off that bus. She battled for her life for 12 days, and unfortunately she succumbed to her injuries. And since that incident took place in 2012, there have been many changes that have been made in laws, in judicial processes, especially when it comes to crimes against women in the country. And in fact, a lot of political observers say that there have been a lot of strides that have also been made when it comes to women's empowerment and upliftment in education, in civil rights, in employability, and even income generation. But at the same time, women's rights activists feel that there is still a lot that remains to be done. There is still a very wide gap when it comes to equality between men and women in the country. And in fact, recent government data does back that. The proportion of women in the country that are unemployed and illiterate is 5 times that of men. And even a very stark recent report suggests that in 2022 alone, there were 51 crimes against women reported every single day in 2022.
Priya, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. That's Priyata Brajabasi reporting for us from New Delhi. Many thanks to her, and many thanks as well to you, Solange Mougin, for that look at the situation in Afghanistan on this International Human Rights Day, December 10th.